Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Clara Johnson. He thought she was just a maid. Just another quiet woman in a black uniform, moving through marble hallways with her eyes lowered and her hands folded, trained to disappear before powerful people remembered she existed. But that rainy evening, on a narrow street outside a small pharmacy in South Chicago, Clara Johnson was about to do something no one else dared to do. And by tomorrow morning, the most feared Mafia family in the city would know her name. The rain came down in silver sheets, turning the sidewalk into mirrors of broken light. Cars hissed past the curb. Neon signs flickered through the mist. People rushed by with umbrellas tilted low, collars raised, faces hidden. Clara had just finished a 12-hour shift at the Romano estate. Her shoes were soaked. Her back ached. Her hands still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and bleach. Under her thin coat, her maid's uniform clung to her skin, damp from the walk from the bus stop. All she wanted was to get home, change clothes, and make it to the little cafe her aunt owned before closing time. Mercy Café. That was the only place in the city where Clara did not feel invisible. At the Romano mansion, she polished silver that cost more than her rent. She scrubbed wine stains from carpets imported from Italy. She served coffee to men who never looked at her face, only snapped their fingers when their cups were empty. But at Mercy Café, people said her name. Miss Clara. Clara, baby. Clara, you saved me a slice of pie? There. She was not the maid. She was someone. She was crossing the street when she heard the sound. A paper bag tearing. Then a soft gasp. Clara turned. An old man stood outside the pharmacy entrance, bent slightly under the weight of 2 brown grocery bags. One had split open at the bottom. Medicine bottles rolled across the wet pavement. A loaf of bread slid toward the gutter. An orange bounced once, then disappeared beneath a parked car. The old man reached for it, but his knees betrayed him. He stumbled. 3. People walked around him. One man glanced down, annoyed that the old man was blocking the doorway. A young woman stepped over the fallen medicine without slowing down. A businessman muttered something under his breath and kept moving. Clara stopped. The rain struck her face like cold needles. For 1 second, she looked at the bus stop down the street. Her bus was already there, lights glowing through the rain. If she missed it, she would be late to the cafe. Her aunt would be alone during the dinner rush. Her feet throbbed. Her stomach was empty. Then the old man tried to bend again, and his hand shook so badly he nearly fell. Clara ran. Sir, she called gently, kneeling before him. Please don't bend down. I've got it. The old man looked at her. His face was deeply lined, his silver hair hidden beneath an old wool hat. His coat was expensive, but worn as if he did not care who noticed. His eyes were pale gray, sharp in a way that did not match his fragile body. I can manage, he said. Clara picked up the medicine bottles one by one, wiping rainwater from their labels with the corner of her sleeve. I believe you, she said softly. But you don't have to. Something changed in his expression. Not much. Just a pause. Clara gathered the bread, the oranges, the small box of tea, and tucked them carefully into the stronger bag. The torn one she folded under her arm. Then she removed the scarf from around her own neck and wrapped it around the handles so they would not cut into his fingers. The old man watched every movement. You don't know me, he said. Clara smiled, rain dripping from her lashes. No, sir. Then why help? She looked up at him, steady and tired and kind. Because you needed help. The street seemed to quiet around them. Even the rain sounded softer. The old man stared at her as if she had spoken a language he had forgotten long ago. Behind his gray eyes, something old and guarded shifted. Clara stood and lifted both bags. Where are you headed? He pointed with his cane toward a black car parked half a block away, almost invisible beneath the rain and shadow. Clara walked beside him slowly, matching his pace. She did not rush him. She did not sigh. She did not make him feel like a burden. When they reached the car, the old man turned to her. What is your name? Clara Johnson. He repeated it once. Clara Johnson, as if filing it somewhere important. Then he asked, Where do you work, Clara Johnson? She hesitated, embarrassed by the uniform beneath her coat. I clean houses in the morning, she said. And evenings, I help my aunt at Mercy Café on Halstead. The old man nodded. Mercy Café. A driver stepped out of the black car and opened the door. Clara noticed then how the driver stood, too straight, too alert, one hand near his jacket. Not a normal driver. But Clara said nothing. She only handed the bags over carefully. "Get home safe, sir." The old man lowered himself into the car. Before the door closed, he looked at her one last time. "You too, Clara." The car pulled away. Clara stood alone in the rain, unaware that the man she had just helped was Salvatore Romano, father of Dante Romano, founder of the most feared Mafia empire in Chicago. And by sunrise, her bodyguards would be standing outside her cafe. The room went silent before the storm even arrived. Clara Johnson did not know that the old man's name had once made grown men lower their voices. She did not know that 3 cars followed his black sedan through the rain, watching every corner, every window, every shadow between the pharmacy and the Romano estate. She did not know that before she even reached the bus stop, someone had already called her name into a private phone line. Clara Johnson, Mercy Café, Halsted Street. To her, the evening continued like any other. Wet shoes, empty stomach, tired bones. The bus was gone by the time she hurried back to the stop, its red taillights disappearing into the curtain of rain. Clara closed her eyes for 1 second, breathing through the disappointment. Then she pulled her coat tighter, lowered her head, and started walking. 4 blocks, then 6, then 9. By the time she reached Mercy Café, the windows were glowing warm against the storm. The little bell above the door gave its familiar tired jingle, and the smell of coffee, cinnamon, and toasted bread wrapped around her like a hand. On the shoulder, "Clara," her aunt called from behind the counter. "Baby, you're soaked." Aunt Ruth was 68, small but strong, with silver braids pinned beneath a red scarf and eyes that could soften a room or silence it. She had raised Clara after Clara's mother passed, and she ran Mercy Café the same way some people ran churches, with patience, discipline, and a stubborn belief that everyone deserved a seat. Clara smiled, even though her feet hurt. "Missed the bus." Aunt Ruth frowned. "Again, I stopped to help someone." That was all Clara said, because Clara never made a performance of kindness. She hung her wet coat in the back, tied on a faded blue apron over her maid uniform, and stepped behind the counter. Her hands moved by memory. 2 coffees for the construction workers at table 3. Soup for Mr. Alvarez, who always pretended he was not hungry until Clara placed it in front of him anyway. Warm milk for little Benny, whose mother worked late shifts at the hospital. Mercy Café was not beautiful in the way rich people use that word. The floor tiles were cracked. The tables did not match. One corner of the ceiling had a brown water stain shaped like a cloud. The sign outside flickered whenever the wind got too strong. But people came there because the coffee was hot, the lights were soft, and no one was asked to leave just because they looked tired. Clara moved from table to table with quiet grace. At the Romano mansion, she kept her eyes down to survive. Here, she looked people in the face. "Eat before it gets cold, Mr. Alvarez." "You passed your test, Benny?" "I knew you would." "Mrs. Cole, I saved you the last piece of peach pie." Every word was small. Every word mattered. Near closing time, as the rain softened to a whisper against the windows, a man in a dark coat stepped into the cafe. Clara noticed him because he did not belong. Not because he was loud. He was the opposite. Still, careful. His eyes moved across the room once, taking in the exits, the kitchen door, the counter, the customers, Clara. Then he sat at the booth by the window and ordered black coffee. No sugar. No cream. He did not touch it. He only watched. Clara felt the weight of his attention, but said nothing. Working in powerful homes had taught her that some men carried danger like expensive cologne, invisible until they were too close. Still, when she passed his table, she refilled his cup. "Long night?" she asked politely. The man looked up. For a moment, his expression almost softened. You could say that. His voice was calm, but trained, like every word had been cleared before leaving his mouth. Clara nodded and moved on. Behind the counter, Aunt Ruth leaned close. "You know him?" "No, he knows you." Clara glanced back. The man by the window had taken out his phone. He spoke only 2 sentences into it. "She's here." Then, after a pause, "She's exactly what he said." Clara's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Outside, across the wet street, a black car waited beneath a broken street lamp. Inside that car, Salvatore Romano sat in silence, his cane resting across his knees, his gray eyes fixed on the warm little cafe where a tired maid served hungry strangers as if they were royalty. His driver looked at him through the mirror. "Sir." Salvatore did not answer at first. He watched Clara place a free bowl of soup in front of an old woman who had counted coins twice and still come up short. Then he said quietly, "Tomorrow morning, send for men." The driver nodded. "To protect her?" Salvatore's eyes did not move from the cafe window. "To make sure the world understands who she is." And inside Mercy Cafe, Clara kept pouring coffee, unaware that her simple kindness had just reached the heart of a kingdom built on fear. The rain stopped, but something much larger had already begun. The next morning, the Romano estate looked untouched by rain. Sunlight poured across the marble driveway. Gardeners trimmed the hedges into perfect green walls. Black cars rolled through the iron gates without sound. Inside, chandeliers burned above floors so polished they reflected every face except the faces of the people cleaning them. Clara arrived before 7. Her uniform was pressed, though the hem was still slightly damp from the night before. Her hands were wrapped in thin cotton gloves to hide the cracks across her knuckles. She signed in through the servant's entrance, placed her bag in the staff room, and began work before anyone important woke up. That was how the mansion functioned. The powerful slept. The invisible prepared the world for them. Clara dusted the west hallway, polished the brass railings, changed the flowers in the dining room, and carried fresh towels to the guest suites. No one thanked her. No one needed to. Gratitude was not part of her job description. By noon, the estate had changed into something colder. Guests began arriving. Women in silk dresses, men in tailored suits, diamonds at throats, watches worth more than Mercy Cafe's yearly rent. Their laughter floated through the halls like music with no warmth. Dante Romano was hosting a private engagement luncheon. His fiancée, Valeria Bellini, had insisted on it. Clara had seen Valeria before, tall, beautiful, sharp as cut glass. She carried herself like every room owed her attention. When she smiled, people leaned closer. When she frowned, servants disappeared. Clara was arranging crystal glasses near the long dining table when Valeria entered with 2 friends behind her. The scent of expensive perfume reached the room before her voice did. "There she is," Valeria said lightly. "The quiet one." Clara kept her eyes on the glasses. "Yes, ma'am." Valeria looked her up and down, from the simple black dress to the worn shoes polished too many times. "I need you to be extra careful today. These guests are not used to carelessness." One of the women behind her laughed softly. Clara nodded. "Of course, ma'am." She reached for the wine decanter, but her fingers cramped suddenly. The handle slipped half an inch against the tray. Not enough to spill, not enough to break, but enough for Valeria to see. Her smile sharpened. "Oh dear." The dining room quieted. Clara steadied the tray immediately. "I apologize." Valeria stepped closer, her heels clicking against the marble. "You people always apologize after nearly ruining something expensive." Clara felt the words hit harder than they should have. She had been insulted before. Quietly, carelessly, sometimes with smiles. But this was different. This was meant to be heard. A man near the fireplace chuckled into his glass. Another guest glanced over, amused. Clara lowered her eyes. Valeria reached toward the tray and lifted one crystal glass between 2 fingers. "Do you know how much this costs?" "No, ma'am." "Of course you don't." Valeria tilted the glass toward her friends. "More than a month of her wages, I'm sure." A few people laughed. Not loudly. That would have been less cruel. This laughter was soft, polished, acceptable. The kind of laughter rich people used when they wanted pain to look like manners. Clara's throat tightened, but she did not move. Across the room, Dante Romano stood near the window, speaking with 2 men in dark suits. He had heard. Clara knew he had heard because his conversation stopped for half a breath. But he did not turn. Not yet. Valeria noticed that too. It made her bolder. She placed the glass back on the tray, then deliberately brushed her fingers against the edge. The glass tipped. Clara caught it before it fell. The room held its breath. Valeria's eyes narrowed, disappointed that nothing had shattered. "Lucky," she whispered. Clara's hands were trembling now, but her voice stayed low. "Will there be anything else, ma'am?" Valeria leaned close enough that only Clara and the nearest guests could hear. "Yes. Remember your place." The words settled over Clara like dust. For one second, She was not in the Romano mansion. She was 8 years old again, watching her mother come home from cleaning offices with swollen feet and a smile that tried to hide exhaustion. She could hear her mother's voice. Never let someone else's cruelty decide your worth, Clara. So Clara swallowed the pain. She lifted the tray, and she said nothing. But silence did not mean surrender. At the doorway, an elderly man had just entered unnoticed. Silver hair, black cane, gray eyes. Salvatore Romano stopped beneath the archway, raincoat folded over one arm, watching the beautiful woman in diamonds humiliate the maid who had carried his bags through the storm. No one saw his face change. No one saw the old warmth disappear. But Dante did. From across the room, Dante finally turned. His father's eyes were not on him. They were on Clara. And, in that instant, Dante Romano understood something had gone terribly wrong. The dining room went silent. Clara carried the silence of the dining room with her for the rest of the day. It followed her down the servant hallway. It followed her into the laundry room, where steam rose from white sheets and the machines groaned like tired animals. It followed her while she folded napkins for people who had laughed at her pain without ever learning her name. By 6 o'clock, her shift finally ended. She removed her cotton gloves in the staff room and stared at her hands. The skin across her knuckles had split again. A thin red line showed near her thumb, but she wrapped it with tissue, pulled on her coat, and told herself she did not have time to hurt. Mercy Café needed her. Aunt Ruth needed her. And Clara had learned long ago that pain could wait when bills could not. Outside, the sky had turned the color of old steel. The rain had stopped, but the city still smelled wet. Pavement, gasoline, cold brick, and distant smoke from food carts closing for the night. Clara took the bus halfway, then walked the rest. When Mercy Café came into view, she slowed. Something was wrong. The warm yellow lights were on, but no one was laughing inside. No clatter of cups. No soft jazz from the old radio behind the counter. Through the window, Clara saw Aunt Ruth standing near the register, one hand pressed to her chest. Across from her stood Mr. Harlan, the landlord. He was a thin man with a silver tie and a smile that never reached his eyes. Beside him were two men Clara had never seen before. Large men, quiet men, the kind who did not need to raise their voices because their bodies did the speaking. Clara pushed open the door. The bell rang once. Everyone turned. Aunt Ruth's face changed with relief and fear at the same time. "Clara," she whispered. Mr. Harlan smiled. "Well, there she is, the hard-working niece." Clara stepped behind the counter and stood beside her aunt. "What's going on?" Mr. Harlan placed a folder on the counter and tapped it with 2 fingers. "Business." Clara looked down. A notice of rent increase. Her eyes moved over the numbers once. Then again. That can't be. Right. It is. This is more than double. "Neighborhood is changing," Harlan said, shrugging. "Property values rise. People who can't keep up move on." Aunt Ruth's voice trembled. "We've been here 18 years. And I've been patient for 18 years. The words were polite, but something ugly lived beneath them. Clara felt the cafe around her like a living thing. The cracked tiles her uncle had laid by hand. The counter her mother used to wipe down every Sunday after church. The back wall covered in old photographs, birthdays, graduations, customers who had become family. Mercy Café was not just a business. It was the last place in the neighborhood where tired people could still be treated gently. Clara picked up the paper. "You gave us 30 days last month. I changed my mind. You can't just do that." Harlan leaned closer. "Actually, I can. Unless you have lawyers hiding behind that coffee machine." One of the men beside him laughed. Aunt Ruth flinched. Clara noticed. Something inside her steadied. She folded the notice carefully and placed it back on the counter. "How much time?" Harlan smiled wider. 3 days. The cafe seemed to shrink around them. 3 days. Aunt Ruth breathed. "Pay the new rate or leave." Clara's jaw tightened. "You know we can't raise that kind of money in 3 days. Then maybe this place was never yours to keep." The sentence landed harder than the insult at the mansion, because this time, Clara saw Aunt Ruth's eyes fill with tears, and that was where her fear ended. Clara stepped forward, putting herself between her aunt and the men. "You can talk to me," she said quietly. "Not her." Harlan studied her, amused. "There it is. The little maid with a backbone." Clara did not blink. "I said talk to me." For 1 second, no one moved. Then Harlan picked up the folder and tucked it under his arm. "Kindness is sweet, Miss Johnson. But kindness doesn't pay rent. He turned toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Clara? She looked at him. Don't waste time praying for miracles. In this city, people like you don't get rescued. The bell rang again as he left. The two men followed. Outside, their shadows passed across the window and disappeared into the dark. Aunt Ruth sank into the nearest chair. Clara went to her immediately, kneeling beside her. I'm sorry, Ruth whispered. Your mama loved this place. I tried to hold on. Clara took her hands. No, don't do that. We're still here. With what money, baby? Clara had no answer. She looked around the cafe, at the empty tables, the chipped mugs, the little tip jar with $12 and some coins inside. Then she stood. We won't lose this place, she said. Her voice was soft, but it did not shake. Across the street, beneath a broken street lamp, a black car sat in silence. Inside, Salvatore Romano watched through the rain-streaked glass as Clara placed a blanket over her aunt's shoulders, then turned the cafe sign from open to closed with hands that refused to tremble. His driver glanced at him in the mirror. Sir. Salvatore's fingers tightened around the silver head of his cane. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his eyes hardened. Find out who owns that building. The driver nodded. And after that, Salvatore looked back at Mercy Café. At sunrise, he said, send 4 men. The street went quiet. And somewhere in the heart of the city, Justice began putting on a black suit. Dante Romano did not sleep much that night. Men like him rarely did. Sleep required trust, and trust was a luxury his world punished. So he sat in his private study long after midnight, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a glass of untouched whiskey beside a stack of reports. Territory disputes. Shipping delays. A judge who suddenly wanted more money. A rival family testing the edge of his patience. Normally, Dante could read danger in numbers, in silence, in the way men avoided eye contact before betrayal. But tonight, his mind kept returning to the dining room, to Valeria's voice, to Clara Johnson's lowered eyes, to his father standing beneath the archway with that terrible stillness in his face. Dante had seen Salvatore Romano angry before. His father's anger was not loud. It did not break furniture or raise fists. It simply entered a room and made every guilty man remember God. At 2:17 in the morning, the study door opened. No knock. Dante looked up. Salvatore Romano walked in slowly, leaning on his silver-headed cane. Behind him, the hallway remained empty. No guards. No assistant. No warning. Just the old man and the silence he carried. Dante stood immediately. Father. Salvatore did not answer. He crossed the room and placed a brown paper bag on Dante's desk. It was old, wrinkled from rain, with one handle repaired by a dark blue scarf tied carefully around it. Dante looked at it, confused. What is this? Salvatore lowered himself into the chair across from him. The reason your fiancée will never become my daughter-in-law. The words landed without force. That made them worse. Dante's jaw tightened. Valeria offended you. No, Salvatore said. She revealed herself. Dante remained still. Salvatore reached into the bag and removed 3 things. A bottle of heart medication, a loaf of bread wrapped in damp paper, and 1 orange bruised from the fall. Yesterday evening, he said, outside a pharmacy, I dropped these. Dante's expression shifted slightly. I had 2 guards half a block away. A driver waiting. 3 strangers saw me struggle. They stepped around me as if age were contagious. His fingers rested on the orange. Then your maid came running through the rain. Dante looked at the bag again. Clara. Clara Johnson. Salvatore corrected. Not the maid. Not the servant. Her full name. She was exhausted. Soaked. Late for another shift. I could see it in her face. Still, she knelt in the rain and picked up every bottle before it rolled into the street. Dante said nothing. She wrapped the handle with her own scarf so it wouldn't hurt my hand. Salvatore's voice lowered. When I asked why she helped a stranger, do you know what she said? Dante waited. Salvatore looked up. Because you needed help. The study became very quiet. Outside the window, Chicago glowed cold and distant beneath the night. Dante thought of Clara standing in the dining room, hands trembling around a tray, while Valeria smiled like cruelty was an accomplishment. He had heard the insult. He had also done nothing. That truth sat between father and son like a loaded gun. Salvatore saw it. You heard her, he said. Dante's eyes darkened. Yes. And you stayed silent. Dante's mouth tightened, but no defense came, because none deserved to. Salvatore leaned forward, both hands on the cane. I built this family in blood and fear. I have done things no priest would forgive. But even I know this. The moment we begin measuring people by their uniforms, we become less than the monsters our enemies call us. Dante lowered his gaze. For a long time, he stared at the repaired handle on the paper bag. A maid had seen his father as a human being. His future wife had seen that same woman as dirt. And Dante, with all his power, had watched both truths collide. What do you want done? He asked quietly. Salvatore's eyes hardened. The cafe. Dante looked up. Salvatore placed a second folder on the desk. Inside were photographs, ownership records, rent notices, and Mr. Harlan's name printed across the top. He is forcing them out, Salvatore said. 3 days. Double rent. 2 hired thugs to frighten an old woman. Dante picked up the file. His face changed as he read. Not rage. Control. The colder kind. The building can be bought by sunrise, Dante said. It already has been, Salvatore replied. Dante paused. Salvatore's mouth barely moved. I did not come for permission. I came to see what kind of man you will be when the woman you failed is standing in front of you again. The words struck deeper than accusation. Dante closed the file. Then he reached for his phone. Luca, he said when the call connected. For men. Mercy Café. At sunrise. He listened for 1 second. No threats. No weapons shown. They are not going there to scare her. His eyes lifted to his father. They are going there to protect what should have been protected already. Salvatore stood slowly. At the door, he stopped. Remember this, Dante. Power is not proven by who kneels before you. He looked back. It is proven by who stands taller because you entered the room. Then he left. Dante remained alone in the study, the repaired paper bag still on his desk. And for the first time in years, the most feared man in Chicago felt ashamed of his own silence. At 6:00 for the next morning, Clara Johnson unlocked. Mercy Café with swollen eyes and a heart she had not allowed to break yet. The street was still half asleep. A delivery truck rumbled past. Steam rose from a sewer grate. Somewhere down the block, a bus sighed open its doors, releasing tired workers into the pale blue morning. Clara turned the key, pushed the door open, and stood for a moment in the quiet cafe. The chairs were still upside down on the tables. The counter smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee. Aunt Ruth's red scarf hung on the hook near the kitchen, and the sight of it made Clara's throat tighten. 3 days. That was all Mr. Harlan had given them. 3 days to save 18 years. Clara set her bag down, tied on her apron, and began doing the only thing she knew how to do when fear entered the room. She worked. She wiped the counters, filled the sugar jars, folded napkins, turned on the old radio, though the sound came out soft and scratchy. Then she started the first pot of coffee, watching the dark liquid drip slowly into the glass. Her hands moved steadily. Her mind did not. How much could she borrow? Who would lend to her? Could she sell her mother's necklace? Could Aunt Ruth stay with Mrs. Cole if they lost the apartment above the cafe? The thoughts came too fast. Then came the knock. Not the little jingle of the bell. A knock. Heavy. Controlled. Final. Clara froze. Through the front window, she saw them. 4 men stood outside Mercy Café, all in black suits, all broad-shouldered, all still in a way that made the sidewalk seem smaller around them. For 1 second, Clara could not breathe. Mr. Harlan. He had sent them early. Aunt Ruth stepped out from the kitchen, tying her scarf with trembling fingers. Baby. Clara moved before fear could stop her. She crossed the room and stood between her aunt and the door. Stay behind me. Clara, please. The knock came again. Clara lifted her chin, walked to the door, and unlocked it. The man in front was tall, with close-cropped hair and a scar along his jaw. But when he looked at Clara, there was no cruelty in his eyes. Only respect. Miss Johnson. Clara's hand tightened around the doorframe. Yes. My name is Luca Moretti. We were sent by Mr. Romano. The name passed through the cafe like cold wind. Aunt Ruth gasped softly behind her. Clara's face hardened. I don't know what Mr. Harlan told you, she said, voice low. But if you came to scare someone, scare me. Not her. The 4 men did not move. Then Luca did something Clara did not expect. He lowered his head. Not much, but enough. Miss Johnson, we are not here to scare you. He reached into his coat. Clara's body tensed. Luca noticed and moved slowly, carefully, taking out not a weapon, but a cream-colored envelope sealed with black wax. He placed it in her hands. "This is for you and Mrs. Ruth Johnson." Clara looked down. Her name was written across the front in clean black ink. She opened it with fingers that did not feel like her own. Inside were documents. Legal papers. A deed. Her eyes moved over the words once. Then again. The building address. Mercy Café. Owner, Ruth Johnson and Clara Johnson. Clara stopped breathing. Aunt Ruth came closer, one hand pressed to her mouth. "What is it?" she whispered. Clara could barely speak. "It's ours." The cafe went silent. Even the coffee machine seemed to pause. Luca placed a second folder on the counter. The previous owner signed transfer documents at 5:32 this morning. His lease increase is void. His men will not return. Aunt Ruth gripped the counter as if the floor had shifted beneath her. Who did this? Luca's answer was quiet. Salvatore Romano. The name meant nothing to Clara at first. Then she saw the black car parked across the street. The same car from the rain. The same driver. And in the back seat, barely visible through tinted glass, sat the old man from the pharmacy. The man with the cane. The man whose bag she had carried. Clara stepped toward the window, her hand still holding the deed. The old man looked at her through the glass. Then he lifted 2 fingers gently from the silver head of his cane. Not like a king greeting a subject. Like one human being honoring another. Clara's eyes filled before she could stop them. Luca spoke again. "Mr. Romano also asked us to remain outside during business hours for the next few days." Clara turned back. "Why?" "To make sure no one mistakes." Kindness for weakness again. The words landed softly. But they shook the room. Aunt Ruth began to cry. Not loudly. Just one hand over her mouth, shoulders trembling as Clara turned and wrapped her arms around her. For 18 years, Mercy Café had fed people who could not always pay. For 18 years, it had kept its lights on for the lonely, the poor, the forgotten. And now, for the first time, someone powerful had protected it without asking for anything in return. Outside, the 4 bodyguards took their places by the door. Inside, Clara wiped her tears, turned the sign to open, and poured the first cup of coffee. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear. The whole street seemed to hold its breath. That evening, the Romano mansion glittered like nothing had happened. Crystal chandeliers burned above the grand dining room. Candles lined the long table in perfect gold rows. Silver forks rested beside porcelain plates. Outside the tall windows, Chicago stretched beneath the darkening sky, cold and beautiful and unaware. Valeria Bellini arrived in white silk. She smiled as though the world had been arranged for her comfort. On her left hand, the engagement ring flashed each time she lifted her champagne glass. A diamond large enough to make every woman at the table glance twice, and every man pretend not to. Dante Romano sat at the head of the table. Still. Silent. Too silent. Valeria noticed, but she mistook it for power. She always had. To her, Dante's quiet was not sorrow, not judgment, not restraint. It was simply the atmosphere around a man she intended to own. "To family," she said, raising her glass. Her friends echoed her. "To family." Dante did not drink. Across from him, Salvatore Romano sat with both hands resting on the silver head of his cane. His face revealed nothing, but the room felt colder because of him. Valeria turned toward him with a practiced smile. "Mr. Romano, I hope the luncheon yesterday pleased you. I wanted everything to be perfect." Salvatore looked at her. Perfect. The word was soft. Valeria's smile flickered. Yes. Elegant. Proper. Suitable for the Romano name. Dante finally lifted his eyes. "And what is suitable for?" "The Romano name, Valeria?" She laughed lightly, uncertain whether this was a test or a joke. "Strength. Loyalty. Class." A few guests nodded. Dante leaned back in his chair. "Respect." The word landed in the room like a glass set down too hard. Valeria paused. "Of course." Dante looked at her hand, at the ring he had placed there months ago when he still believed beauty and loyalty could live in the same skin. "Do you remember Clara Johnson?" The dining room changed. Only slightly. A fork stopped moving. Someone's breath caught. One of Valeria's friends looked down at her plate. Valeria's face tightened. "The maid." Dante did not blink. "Her name is Clara Johnson." Valeria gave a small smile, the kind people use when they want cruelty to look reasonable. "If this is about yesterday, Dante, I was simply correcting staff behavior." You know how servants can be if boundaries aren't maintained. Salvatore's fingers tightened around the cane. Dante noticed. So did everyone else. Boundaries, Dante repeated. Valeria lifted her chin. Yes, a household like this requires order. People should know their place. For the first time that night, Dante smiled. It was not warm. It was not kind. It was the kind of smile that made the men near the walls stand straighter. And what is her place? Valeria stared at him. I don't understand. Dante's voice stayed calm. Clara Johnson worked 12 hours in this house yesterday. Then she walked through the rain to help an old man carry his bags. She did not ask his name. She did not ask what he could do for her. She helped because he needed help. The room went completely quiet. Valeria's eyes shifted towards Salvatore. Too late. Salvatore slowly stood. Every man at the table rose with him. Valeria did not. She seemed frozen in her chair, all the color draining from her carefully painted face. The old man stepped into the candlelight. Only then did she see it. The cane, the silver hair, the gray eyes. The same old man she had walked past without noticing when she entered the mansion the day before. The same old man Clara had defended from the rain and humiliation of being unseen. Salvatore looked at Valeria as though he were reading the final page of a disappointing book. That woman carried my bags, he said. Your guests carried their pride. Hers was lighter. No one moved. Dante stood. The scrape of his chair against the marble floor echoed through the room. Valeria rose too, panic beginning to crack through her elegance. Dante, this is ridiculous. You cannot be serious. She is staff. Dante stepped closer. She is a woman who showed my father more honor in 5 minutes than you have shown this family in 6 months. Valeria's mouth opened. No words came. Dante reached for her left hand. For one brief second, she thought he was going to comfort her. Instead, he removed the engagement ring. Slowly, carefully. Then he placed it on the white tablecloth between them. The diamond flashed under the chandelier like a cold star. This engagement is over. A gasp moved through the guests. Valeria's face twisted with disbelief. You would humiliate me over a maid. Dante's eyes hardened. No, he said. You humiliated yourself when you thought kindness was beneath you. The silence afterward was absolute. Valeria looked around for support, but no one met her eyes. Not her friends. Not the guests. Not even the men who had laughed yesterday. Dante turned to Luca by the door. Escort Miss Bellini out. Luca stepped forward. Valeria's voice broke into anger. You'll regret this. Salvatore answered before Dante could. No, the old man said quietly. He would have regretted marrying you. And that was the final word. Valeria walked out of the Romano mansion without the ring, without the title, and without the room that had once bowed to her beauty. When the doors closed behind her, Dante looked toward his father. Salvatore did not smile. He only said, Now go apologize to the woman you allowed to stand alone. Dante lowered his eyes. For once, the most feared man in Chicago had no command to give, only a debt to repay. The next morning, Mercy Café opened under a different kind of silence. Not the silence of fear. Not the silence that followed threats or shame. This silence felt like the moment before a church bell rings, quiet, watchful, full of something no one wanted to name too quickly. 4. Bodyguards stood outside the cafe door, spaced evenly along the sidewalk. They did not block customers. They did not speak unless spoken to. They simply stood there in black suits beneath the soft morning light, turning every curious glance into a lowered head. Inside, Aunt Ruth moved behind the counter with red eyes and trembling hands. Every few minutes, she would look at the deed again, then at the walls, then at Clara, as if she were afraid the cafe might disappear if she stopped checking. Clara tried to act normal. She poured coffee, warmed biscuits, wiped tables, smiled at customers who whispered about the men outside and the black car that had been parked across the street since sunrise. But nothing felt normal. Mercy Café was theirs now. No landlord could throw them out. No stranger could walk in and double the rent with a smile. No hired man could make Aunt Ruth shake in her own home. And still, Clara's heart felt heavy, because power had touched her life overnight. And power always came with a shadow. At 9:16, the bell above the door rang. The cafe went still. Dante Romano stepped inside alone. No guards entered with him. No one opened the door for him. No weapon showed beneath his coat, though Clara knew men like him never walked anywhere unprotected. He wore a black overcoat over a charcoal suit, his dark hair combed back, his face calm in a way that made even calm feel dangerous. The bodyguards outside did not turn. They already knew he was there. Every customer lowered their eyes. Aunt Ruth froze behind the counter, one hand on the coffee pot. Clara stood near table 4, holding a damp cloth. For a moment, Dante simply looked around. At the cracked tiles, at the mismatched chairs, at the wall of old photographs, at the handwritten sign beside the register that read, "If you're hungry and short on money, tell Clara." Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Something deeper. Regret, maybe. He walked toward Clara. The room watched him cross the floor. Clara did not step back. She had been afraid of many things in her life. Bills, eviction, illness, the quiet cruelty of people who smiled while hurting you. But she was tired of shrinking. Dante stopped in front of her. "Miss Johnson." No one in the cafe breathed. Clara held his gaze. "Mr. Romano." Dante lowered his head. Not a nod. A bow. Small, but unmistakable. A mafia boss, standing in a poor cafe, bowing to the maid he had failed to defend. Aunt Ruth covered her mouth. Dante's voice was low. "I owe you an apology." Clara said nothing. He looked at the cloth in her hands, then back at her face. "Yesterday, in my house, you were disrespected. I heard it. I saw it. And I allowed silence to do what cruelty wanted." The words moved through the cafe like wind through candles. Clara's fingers tightened around the cloth. Dante continued. "My father told me you reminded him what dignity looks like." He paused. He was right. Clara's eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. "Your father didn't need to buy this building." "No," Dante said. "He needed to make something right." "That sounds like charity." "It isn't." "Then what is it?" Dante looked toward the window, where Salvatore Romano sat in the black car, one hand resting on his cane, watching without entering. Then Dante turned back. "Respect." The word was quiet, but Clara heard the weight behind it. She placed the cloth on the table. "Respect doesn't mean making people feel indebted." "I know." "Respect doesn't mean using power to make yourself look kind." "I know." "Respect means letting people stand on their own feet." Dante accepted every word like a sentence he deserved. Then he reached into his coat and placed a folder on the table. Not an envelope. Not cash. A proposal. "The building is yours. No conditions. But if you choose, the Romano Foundation will fund repairs, food supplies, and staff wages for Mercy Café to serve as a safe place for elders, single mothers, and anyone in the neighborhood who needs a meal." Clara stared at the folder. Dante added softly, "You would run it. Your rules. Your name. We stay in the background." Aunt Ruth whispered, "Lord have mercy." Clara did not touch the folder yet. She looked around the cafe, at Mr. Alvarez holding his cup with both hands, at Mrs. Cole wiping tears from her cheek, at the old photographs of people who had survived because this place had stayed open. Then she looked back at Dante. "Don't make this place a monument to your guilt." Dante's jaw tightened slightly. Clara's eyes stayed steady. "Make it useful." For the first time, something almost like humility crossed his face. "Yes, ma'am." A small sound moved through the cafe. Not laughter. Relief. Clara finally picked up the folder. Outside, Salvatore Romano watched through the glass and smiled faintly. Inside, Dante stood before Clara Johnson without command, without pride, without defense. And in that quiet little cafe, power did not feel large. Kindness did. 3 weeks later, Mercy Café no longer looked like a place waiting to be taken away. The old sign still flickered in the wind, because Clara refused to replace it. "That sign has survived storms, landlords, and bad wiring," she told the repairman. "It deserves to stay." But inside, the cafe had changed. The ceiling no longer leaked. The cracked front window had been replaced. New shelves held fresh bread, canned goods, blankets, and medicine vouchers for elders who came in pretending they only wanted coffee. A small room in the back had been turned into a quiet corner for mothers with children, with soft chairs, warm lamps, and toys donated by people who had once passed the cafe without looking twice. On the wall near the register hung a simple wooden plaque. No gold, no marble, just carved letters. Mercy Café, everyone eats. Everyone matters. Clara stood beneath it every morning, tying her blue apron, greeting people by name. She was still tired. She still woke before sunrise. She still scrubbed counters, carried trays, counted bills, and stayed late when someone needed to talk. But something in the air had shifted. People no longer looked through her. They looked at her. And more importantly, they listened. Mr. Alvarez now came every afternoon and sat by the window, pretending not to watch over the place like an unofficial guard. Mrs. Cole brought flowers every Friday. Benny, the little boy who used to drink warm milk at the corner table, had started doing his homework near the counter because Clara told him smart boys needed good light. Outside, the 4 bodyguards were gone. Clara had insisted. "This is a cafe," she told Dante, "not a fortress." So the men left. But once in a while, a black car still parked across the street. Salvatore Romano never came in during the lunch rush. He waited until late afternoon, when the light turned honey-colored and the cafe grew quiet. Then he would enter slowly with his silver cane, sit at the booth by the window, and order black coffee he barely touched. Clara always brought him 1 slice of toast. He always pretended he had not asked for it. That afternoon, Dante came with him. The cafe grew still when he entered, but not with fear anymore. People knew who he was. They knew what his name meant. But they also knew he had once stood in that very room and apologized to a maid in front of everyone. That kind of story changes the way power sounds when it walks through a door. Dante stopped near the wall of photographs. There was a new one there. Aunt Ruth stood behind the counter, laughing. Clara was beside her, holding a coffee pot. Salvatore sat in the background by the window, looking annoyed that someone had taken his picture. Dante almost smiled. "You kept him on the wall." Clara glanced over. "He's part of the cafe now." Salvatore grunted. "I am not part of anything with mismatched chairs," Aunt Ruth called from the counter. "Then stop sitting in the same one every day." For the first time anyone could remember, Salvatore Romano laughed softly in public. The sound was small, but it changed the room. Later, when the last customers drifted out and the evening lights warmed the windows, Dante remained near the door, watching Clara wipe down the tables. "You could hire more people," he said. "I did. You're still working." Clara looked at him. "So?" Dante had no answer. She smiled faintly and continued cleaning. "I don't work because I have to prove something," she said. "I work because this place raised me. Because people come in here carrying more than hunger. Sometimes a cup of coffee is the first kind thing they've been given all day." Dante looked toward the sidewalk, where the city moved past in shadows and headlights. "My father says you saved him." Clara shook her head. "I carried his bags." "No," Dante said quietly. "You reminded him he was still worth helping." Clara's hand paused on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Across the room, Salvatore stood with effort and walked toward her. He held the silver cane in one hand and the old blue scarf in the other, the same scarf Clara had tied around his torn paper bag handle in the rain. He placed it gently on the table. "I had it cleaned," he said. Clara touched the fabric, surprised. "You kept it?" Salvatore's gray eyes softened. "Some things are worth keeping." Clara folded the scarf slowly. Then Salvatore looked around the cafe, at the wooden plaque, the warm lights, the photographs, the people outside still glancing in as if Mercy Café was proof that the city had not swallowed everything good. He turned to Dante. "Remember this room?" Dante nodded. Salvatore's voice lowered. "Men will fear your name. That is easy. But if the weakest person in the room does not feel safer when you enter, then your power is worthless." The words settled into Dante like a vow. Clara said nothing. She did not need to. Her life had already spoken louder than any speech. The landlord who tried to take Mercy Café was under investigation. Valeria Bellini had disappeared from the social pages. The guests who had laughed in the Romano dining room now lowered their eyes whenever Clara's name was mentioned. But Clara did not celebrate their fall. She opened the cafe every morning. She fed people. She remembered names. She helped old men carry bags when no one else would. Because dignity was never something power gave her. It was something she had carried all along. That evening, as Clara turned the sign from open to closed, Salvatore raised his coffee cup from the window booth. Dante stood beside him in silence. And outside, beneath the soft glow of the streetlights, the world kept moving. But inside Mercy Café, everyone remembered. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.